Amazon's worth over $1.8 trillion and is the second most valuable company on the Fortune 500 list, but the issue is that you only have a 2% chance of landing a job there. This means that unless you're one of the lucky few, you'll never have access to the career-boosting resources and knowledge that the company offers, but I'm here to try and change that. I've been promoted 4 different times at Amazon, and in this video I'm going to walk you through everything I've learned in the past 4 years, from how to get promoted, to how to build billion-dollar products, and even advice that directors and VPs have given me that's changed my life. It's a bit of a long video, but if you're able to stick all the way through, you might save yourself 4 years of pain and be able to jumpstart your career tomorrow. The first part is to understand how to be a rockstar employee. Most big tech companies have role guidelines, which outline the specifications of what's expected from each role at each level. For example, if you're an entry-level software engineer, you're not going to be expected to do the same thing as you are as a senior software engineer. You might focus on small features with a clearly defined scope, whereas a senior engineer may be focusing on multiple products or a single large product that has more ambiguous problem sets to it. Similarly, if you're a product manager, you might have a few features or a small feature at one scope, but then you might have a set of products at a more senior scope. The difference here is that they want to truly outline the expectations that are needed at each level. Try looking up the guidelines for your desired position. You want to try and find ways that you can model those behaviors in your current environment, because the best way to get promoted is to actually overperform at your current level so that you can reach the next one. These role guidelines will cover anything from scope to ambiguity to technical influence, etc. And it really varies between role, and so you want to familiarize yourself with them when you have the option to. Once you've landed the job, you might get hit with a couple different projects at once, and so it's really important for you to be able to self-motivate and self-prioritize your work. No one's really going to hold your hand to tell you here's the next priority of what things you need to complete. Oftentimes, you'll have multiple things that you're juggling at once, and it's up to you to understand which is the most pressing. It can get really easy to get sucked into the thing that's calling your attention. For example, if there's an unhappy coworker or an unhappy customer that's reaching out to you for support, but the reality is you want to focus on the work that'll help benefit your top level goals. One of my leaders recently told me, think about what your VP would want you to do. Would they want you to deal with a small level problem that's continuously nagging, or would they want you to spend the time developing a system that enables that problem to not occur anymore? Obviously, the latter is going to yield more results, and so you want to focus your efforts on the things that are big rock goals. And inevitably, once you're in this position, you'll find yourself in a scenario where you're stuck. Maybe that's due to your own limitations, or maybe that's just someone else's. And you'll probably need a little bit of help from your manager. The right way to go about being a star employee is that when you go to your manager with a problem, you also have a solution in mind. Let's say, for example, you're a product manager and you own a software that's completely down right now. Servers are down, the software's not working, what do? A newer employee might go to their manager and say, hey boss, we're getting a ton of customer complaints, the service is down. The difference between a junior and a senior employee is that the junior employee expects their boss to figure out the solution for them, whereas a more senior employee is able to figure it out themselves. In a critical scenario, you may need some approval or support from your manager, but the reality is that you should still be the one delivering the solution. For example, if that same software is down, it's up to you to outline some mitigation paths and also understand how you can deal with customer support. That way, when you go to your boss, you can tell them, hey boss, this service is down, but I've talked to all my 10 customers, let them know that we have a wait time of about 2 hours, and also talk to engineering to get the critical services back up. This way, they know you have a mitigation plan in place and you've done all that you need, so they don't have to panic instead. Another element of being a rockstar employee is being willing to jump in to fix mistakes wherever they occur. Too often nowadays, people are obsessed with the idea that it's not my job. As I mentioned earlier, the best way to get promoted is to be able to take on scope that's a little bit larger than what you currently have to do. This isn't to say that you necessarily should just take on other people's work when they're failing, but you want to be able to be the difference maker in an organization. That's how you get the visibility to actually move to the next level. If you identify something that's broken or a customer that needs help, be the one that's willing to jump in and fix. This will likely deepen your understanding of the customer's problem and your solution as well. That way, when you're going to improve that solution, you have a better field of knowledge than somebody who isn't willing to get their hands dirty. And when you spot problems or you run into issues with a standard practice, don't assume that just because something is the best practice or it's written down in some form of policy, that it's the only way to go. Oftentimes, a policy is just something that a person put together on a document because they felt that it was the best way at the time. This doesn't necessarily mean that this can't be iterated on or completely thrown out the window. Oftentimes, people even put those documents together for the purpose of getting promoted, whether or not they actually have any real business impact. Big tech companies continue to innovate in basically every field they touch, whether that's external customer problems or even their internal working flows. So if you see something that you think is broken, be willing to at least ask the question and say, hey, how can this be better? Being willing to look around corners and identify new solutions is actually a great way for you to build your own skill set as well as your promotion path too. Again, if you can go to your manager and identify new opportunities for processes to be better, even when they're not broken, that's a really good way for them to see you as somebody who thinks next level. Next, let's talk about the process of growing in your environment. To get promoted, you might expect me to talk about some sort of technical skill, but actually the most important thing to learn is to build political capital in your environment. On my first weeks in the job at Amazon, I sat down with one of my senior leaders and said, hey, how can I grow? And that was the main thing he told me. It wasn't anything technical. It wasn't even related to knowing the process. It was to just build political capital. The reality is, workplace politics exists in every environment, whether or not you like it, and you must be able to master it to some degree. It doesn't mean you have to necessarily kiss up to people or anything, but you do have to know how to navigate a workplace environment well enough to get yourself where you want to go. Easy tips are just to present yourself professionally, be yourself, but don't try to come off as overly confident, arrogant, or too informal. I'm actually of the belief that any group of humans more than about 5 is going to have some degree of inherent political structure, even if it's a group of your friends. For example, if you have a group of about 10 friends, maybe 2 of the friends have known each other for a lot longer than the other 8. Maybe Johnny was in a relationship with Sally a few years ago, and so it's a little bit weird when they get together. There's a lot of small dynamics like that that really can feed themselves into any environment, but particularly a workforce environment. And so because of this, it's really important to be cognizant of what forces other people have going on. A really good way to navigate this is to help people get to where they want to go. If you can be someone who enables other people's goals and is helping them all the time, you'll inherently be someone who is liked and also seen as reliable in most environments. Additionally, we talked about going above and beyond in your role, but you want to make sure you nail the basics first rather than the other way around. I tried to make this mistake too at first, where I wanted to do all of the extra things outside of my role because I thought my base role actually wasn't good enough for me. When I talked to that same senior manager, he said make sure you do the basics of your role. I was an area manager at the time, and he said become the best floor manager that you can be. Then you can focus on doing the stuff on top. Additionally, when planning out your career goals, if you're not too sure of where you want to go, don't just focus on the end goal, but also focus on building a plan that's concrete over the next 3 to 6 months. Oftentimes, people focus on the end goal that's too lofty and too far away, and so they don't build the necessary foundation to actually take steps in that direction. Your 2-year career plan should have a high-level goal, but your 3 to 6 month plan should be a lot more detailed and should include things that you can actually follow to get yourself where you want to go. Also, if you're looking for ways to go above and beyond, you want to focus on getting projects that have a high degree of visibility. Sometimes these are called as big rock goals. Basically, in the analogy, people only have so much time, and that time is like a jar. The things that you would put in first are the bigger rocks. The things that are smaller and less important are the smaller rocks. And the things that are the least important fill in the gaps, and that's considered the sand. Your directors and VPs are probably focusing on the projects that are big rock goals. If there's a way for you to be associated with those, that's the best opportunity to get promoted. One of the next biggest things I've learned during my time at Amazon is the importance of leadership principles. These are the 14 values that the company holds, such as customer obsession, learn and be curious, are right a lot, diving deep, and so on. These are kind of like guiding principles that help the company make decisions. And at a lot of organizations, their company values are kind of just like empty statements that they put up on a wall somewhere. But the reality is at Amazon, they really bleed these leadership principles. They're the foundation for basically everything that goes on. Additionally, you're actually even measured against these in your performance reviews and your promotion cycles. Leaders evaluate your behavior and your projects by categorizing it into different roles based off the leadership principle. For example, if you led a new global initiative to roll out a software, maybe you delivered results and thought big at the same time. Writing a promotion doc actually goes the same way. A promotion doc at Amazon is filled with examples where you've exhibited these leadership principles by putting your projects through the lens of each principle. The biggest takeaway for this is that if you work at a company, you want to be measuring yourself against what's important. It's not always going to be their company values. At Amazon it is, but it may be something that's important to your leader. You want to continuously assess how you're doing in this. Leaders' top priority is on financial return or thinking big. You want to think about opportunities and projects where you can either do this or you have done this. That way, when it comes time for your performance reviews, you have a good track record of this behavior that you can actually speak to. It's important to mention that in these performance reviews, your leadership principle alignment is not only looked at for your strengths, but also your weaknesses. They'll look at what areas you can actually improve on too. Amazon VPs and directors actually very regularly reference these leadership principles, and I've heard a VP go so far as to say she even carries a copy of them around in her pocket to remind her of what good practice is. And while all of the leadership principles are important, the most important one is customer obsession. Amazon has a philosophy that involves working backwards from what the customer needs. You don't want to necessarily just build a product just for the purpose of building it. You really want to understand who you're building for, and then you understand what you have to build for them. The key is to focus on what your customers want from you and how you can build on their behalf, rather than just focusing on what your competitors are doing or the new hot trend in the economy. Certain leadership principles can also be more important to different individuals. The one that's been the most impactful for me is learn and be curious. A few years ago, I did not have any of the technical skills I needed to be where I am today. I'm currently a technical product manager, managing another person, and I'm responsible for the technical direction of an entire org's set of tools. This means that I have to have a deep understanding of software, customer usability, user experience, user design, AWS technologies, and a lot more. Even 3 or 4 years ago, I didn't have any of this. So by continuously learning and improving my skills inside and outside of work, I've been able to grow tremendously at a very fast pace. This is primarily what's enabled me to go from being entry level to in a senior manager role in just a few years. Different leadership principles can also be more important for you in different levels of your role as well. For example, if you're an entry-level software engineer, the most important thing may be for you to deliver results. You have set tasks you're expected to complete at a certain amount of time that are clearly defined for you. So your job is to make sure they get done. At higher levels, you may be focusing on thinking big. For example, at a senior management role, they may want you to think about influencing the strategy and direction of the entire team. So there, it goes less about completing individual tasks and delivering these results in those areas, and more so on thinking about how the strategy is going forward. I've seen the scope of my role change drastically over time, and I regularly have told my employees that there's certain leadership principles that are more important for them than others. This next section is on building innovative products. One of the biggest things I've learned at Amazon is how to create products that everybody loves. And the most important lesson in this is to really understand your customers' needs. As a product manager, you're expected to keep very close ties to your users, and so you have to really be able to fill in their shoes. If you can't understand their pain points, their struggles, their likes and their benefits, you can't do their job. At Amazon, there's a philosophy called working backwards, which essentially entails starting with the customer's needs in mind. Product managers, or anybody who creates products, should be like the number one user for the tool or the product itself. They have to be the person who can understand the customer's needs better than really anybody else. There's different frameworks and philosophies for doing this, but you have to really be able to empathize with your user. You want to understand what motivates them. What do they really want out of life, and what are they looking at the experience? Why are they using your tool? And to do this, we use what's called a user persona. We start by defining who is actually going to use our product. For example, when Uber first launched, they targeted people in New York City who were looking for a taxi ride. It started with a very specific audience, someone in their mid-20s, and that's who they defined as their persona. A user persona is like an in-depth representation of who your ideal customer is going to be. Maybe it's a 20-year-old in New York who's trying to get to work and they need to catch a taxi on time. That's how Uber defined theirs. Building a user persona is all about getting really specific so you can understand what you're creating for. Maybe that person in their 20s is leaving work at 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. for the purpose of getting to the office. Are they going to specific routes? Are they going to specific places? Maybe they're going to restaurants or bars on the weekends with their friends. You want to understand really what their life is and where they have challenges so you can fill that role. Once you've defined who you're trying to build for, you want to outline what's called a user journey map. A user journey basically walks through their entire life cycle. Talking about the previous example of Uber, maybe this person wakes up at 6 a.m., gets ready at 7, and looks for an Uber while they have breakfast. Maybe they get to their office at 8 or 9 a.m. and maybe while they're on the way out, they're looking for a ride at 5 p.m. Maybe they do this every single day and they do this also on the weekend. Where your user journey comes into play is how your tool, product, or service fits into that equation. For example, if you're building Uber and you know that people are getting rides to and from work every single day at 7 in the morning and 4:30 in the afternoon so that they know to book an Uber. Maybe you can do a subscription where they automatically subscribe and they get it every single day. A user journey diagram not only outlines where in the person's life your product fits, but also how it'll work once they're interacting with the tool. For example, what specific things do they interact with? Where do they purchase? At what point in the process do they actually start engaging and end their engagement? How often do they use it? All of these are considerations you want to make when thinking about your user's behavior. And a lot of that, again, is influenced by your user persona. You want to outline the happy path of what your users do when they're trying to work with your product or service, but also understand that there's alternate paths that they may take as well. This enables you to design your product or service in a way that not only accounts for what you think the person should do, but what they're actually going to do in real life too. Another thing to understand is who your customer is versus who your consumer is. Oftentimes in business, the person who's using the tool isn't the same person who's going to pay. For example, let's say you open a tutoring business for kids who are trying to prepare for the SAT. In this scenario, the students preparing for their AP classes or SAT exams are your customer. They're the ones who you want to create a good experience for, but they're not the ones actually paying. It's more likely going to be their parents or maybe an institution like their school that's funding their education. So with this in mind, you want to tailor your marketing and your user journeys to both of these people. If you run that tutoring business, how can you reach schools? How can you reach parents who are actually going to put their kids in that class? But then how can you ensure that the journey of tutoring is good enough to where the students feel engaged as well? You're simultaneously trying to serve two different people, but it's important to understand this in what sort of business so that you target the right person with the right type of material. Another phenomenon that happens pretty often in business, especially in software, is known as the gulf of evaluation. It's where the person creating the product and the customer don't see eye to eye. They might have different representations of what they're getting. For example, let's say I'm creating a service that helps people get across town to work. Even with a simple sentence like that, the customer in their head might have a pretty well-defined example of what they're thinking of. Maybe they'll think that I'm taking a taxi or a bus to take them across town. However, the person creating the product may have envisioned a boat. They may have envisioned a plane. They may have envisioned something entirely different. So as you go throughout the process of building the product for the user, you have to ensure that you're specific enough with the person to outline what you're truly trying to build. This is what's known as product market fit. This difference in understanding leads to a misalignment of what the customer thought they were going to get. And in reality, your product may not work for them. Maybe not everybody's willing to take a boat across town, or maybe not everybody's willing to take a plane. You have to outline your service in a way that works for the customer and meets their expectations. A good way to do this is to start by iterating small and testing with your users regularly so that you're able to build across the future. In software, this is known as what's called an MVP, or a minimum viable product, which is something you would release to the customer early to get feedback and see how it works. You maybe would start with a small group of users who you can test the product with, and over time really get their feedback before you build the next thing. This is what's known as an agile release cycle. In typical project management, which is known as waterfall, teams would generally plan out the entire end-to-end solution of what they're going to build, go off, build it for 6 months, and then hand it to the customer. You run into this problem of gulf of evaluation very frequently in this sort of style because you didn't actually listen to the customer throughout their needs. It's much better to take an agile approach, which is to release, build, release, show to the customer, build, continue over the course of time. That way you build something that's a lot closer to what the person expects. And honestly, in order to get people to buy into your products, you have to be showing them, not telling them. Giving somebody a picture of what your product will look like isn't sufficient. You have to actually put something into their hands that they can use early and test and tell you how it's going to work. The best way to build a product, again, is to keep the customer's ideas in mind and walk them alongside your journey of building the product. At the highest level, you want to build products or services that make people feel better. Regardless of what industry it is, you can focus on customer delight by bringing them a solution that really meets their needs rather than trying to force a square peg in a round hole. A good way to do this is to learn a little bit about user experience design, which is an extension of what we talked about with user personas and user journeys, which will enable you to really define the flow of what a good product looks like. After you've built your product and you want to start planning for its future, you have to start building out a little bit further. In product management, this is what we call a roadmap. Ideally, once your product is off the ground, at any point you want to have a roughly 1-year vision of what your product will look like in the future. More complex companies use what's called a 3-year plan to actually show the vision of their tool or service over a couple of years, but you should at least have a solid understanding of the next year, even if the next 3 years is just a general direction. Additionally, when you prioritize what features you're going to build over the next 6 months, year, or 3 years, you want to prioritize in different ways. A common methodology for prioritization is the RICE score, which is basically the reach, impact, confidence, and effort that a feature is going to take. The formula basically works where you multiply the reach times the impact times the confidence you have over the effort. For example, if I'm going to release a new feature in Uber that enables people to share rides, I might think of how many people this is going to impact. Maybe this only impacts 10 people. Maybe it's important to 100, or maybe it's important to 1,000. That'd be my reach. How impactful is it? Is it more important than just getting a ride, or is it an add-on feature? That's my impact. What degree of confidence do I have in the feature? Have I done a lot of usability surveys? Have I worked with people? Or am I just making broad guesses? That's my confidence. And then E is the amount of effort it's going to take to actually build that. For example, is it going to take 6 months to get this feature off the ground, or is it something that I can build within a week? As you do that quotient, you'll be able to prioritize things that delight your customers a lot more with less effort and get that to them sooner. With any sort of product vision, you want to also prioritize the things that build for tomorrow's future, but also keep the lights on today. When you're thinking about how much time you have with your build team, you want to prioritize things that make the experience better for people today, while also still building the things that are important for the future. And while you do want to be agile and iterative throughout your build process, you don't want to necessarily rush features out the door. At complex companies like Amazon, a product document that outlines new features could take up to 250 hours to complete. It's important to do the proper research before rolling anything out at a big scale. Because of this, you should have a clear goal, but you want to be willing to test and iterate over time before you actually release a feature to the general public. This last section is about a bunch of advice that I've gotten from directors and VPs over my years at Amazon. I once asked the director what they do as their day-to-day work, and they described it for me in a very interesting way. They described it as though the director is kind of like the host at a party who's up in the balcony looking down at the people below, ensuring everyone's having a good time and that things are moving smoothly. They should be up, ensuring everything works, but they should also be able to step down and move onto the dance floor if needed. As you move up the chain, your work gets less and less tactical. You're less in the day-to-day activities of what's actually going on, and you're more in the sort of strategic side of things. There's a good mix of that tactical and strategic work. You'll still have to understand what's going on day-to-day high level, but the people underneath you are usually responsible for running the operation. You as a director are more so responsible for leading future of the org and ensuring things work top down. This could be a lot of future planning work that enables the team to move forward in a direction where it wasn't before. But the question is, if you're an entry or mid-level role, how do you actually get to a leadership position? There's a couple of things that people have told me, but one of the ones that stuck out the most is that you need to learn to be a salesperson. And this doesn't mean you necessarily have to go out and get traditional sales experience, but you have to be able to convince other people of your ideas. In leadership, you're basically always selling some idea to someone. Whether that's getting funding for a new idea, whether that's expanding your team, or whether it's taking on new projects. You have to be key at convincing other people why your team is worth it. There's a couple more fundamental concepts you'll need to understand as a leader, such as a balance sheet and your profit and loss. This is essentially understanding the bottom line of the financials for your business. If you run a 100-person org or a 50-person org, you want to be able to know the net value of your org and what your team does for the overall business. If your team isn't either making money or contributing to the company making money, then you're a loss, you're a cost factor. And so your team isn't probably going to be around for long. One of the things that directors do well is understanding what business inputs are actually driving their profit and loss as well. For example, if I'm hiring 10 people a year, how much money is each new person generating? What type of people do I need to build into the team to actually grow it? Do I need to hire salespeople? Do I need to hire technical people? What is the return of each person? You have to think of the overall top level goals and ensure investments are put into the right place to yield that bottom line. A lot of the important work as a leader isn't even about what you do, it's about what you put other people in the right position to do as well. Half of being a leader is being able to pick the right individuals to uplift you and the team as a whole. Again, if you run a large org, you may not know all the ins and outs of the software side or the hiring side, but the reality is that you have to find the right people that do and put them in positions to succeed. An Amazon VP recently told me that one of the most expensive mistakes you can make is a wrong hire. By picking the wrong person for the job, you could take an org in the entirely wrong direction. And so you want to make sure the people you put in your foundational positions to support the rest of your org
are the right people. If you want to have a technical leader, they should be well versed in software, in leading software, and building new products. If you want to hire a financial person, you have to make sure they can not only manage money, but they can also drive inputs across the rest of the business as well. And sometimes the most qualified person isn't always the right person. And sometimes the person with the most years of experience isn't always the best person for you. Part of being a leader is knowing your managerial style and where you have strengths and weaknesses and complementing those with the right people. If you are really good as a technical leader, maybe you need somebody else who's better in sales or finances to be able to balance your skill set. Knowing yourself very well and what areas of opportunity you have in the team will enable you to supplement those pieces with a better hire. Directors and VPs have also stressed to me the importance of building a strong network throughout your career. You want to be someone that's easy to work with and is well known for the work they do. You can do this through a couple different ways. You can actually be nice to your peers and make a positive influence in their careers, but you can also do it by getting a lot of mentors. Getting mentors enables you to learn from the people who are in front of you, and by doing so, you don't have to make the same mistakes they did, or you can build on their foundation. Oftentimes, when it's time for promotion, these mentors are the people actually advocating for you, and thus it's good to have people in your corner. Another interesting piece of advice that people have told me, sometimes at work, I'll also doubt myself, and I thought I had a little bit of imposter syndrome, but one of the interesting things that a director told me is that you should actually always be second guessing yourself. You should be doing extra validation to trust your gut decision. You should be doing more to learn and be willing to grow your skill set. When I first joined my team 3 years ago, I asked my director at the time what he did to get to his position. I thought he was going to say how he just moved up the ladder and got more experience, but actually his advice was extremely interesting. He said the one thing he did to get to the director level is change roles. Oftentimes, lateral moves are looked down upon, but getting a wide variety of experiences across different functions actually enables you to serve better as a leader. If you can get your hands into a finance organization, a procurement organization, a tech organization, you're able to better run all three. And so by moving around from different place to place and having different responsibilities, you make yourself a more experienced and well-rounded business leader. The other piece he mentioned was also creating an environment where people want to work with you. Going back to the idea that you're always selling something, this idea works a lot better if you're someone that people just naturally like. That way, people are more willing to hear your radical ideas, and therefore you'll be able to create more buy-in. Your projects will naturally go further and you'll be able to do more with them. Another piece of advice that an Amazon VP recently gave me was on prioritization. When you're managing a large scope, you will oftentimes have very competing priorities. Different people will want your attention, and different things will seem like they're on fire at all the time. A VP I spoke to recently actually told me that even though you can't give every section of your team the same attention, you want to make sure no part of your team is getting zero attention. Everything should have at least a little bit of eyes on it, even if it's running smoothly. Additionally, as you prioritize to the different things you're working on, you don't want to just focus on the things that are pressing or upsetting. Again, it can be easy to focus on the thing where more complaints are coming from, but you have to make sure that the entire wheel is moving. Is the thing that's upsetting or the person that's reaching out actually the most important at the time? Are they going to yield the most business results, or is it just the person who is the neediest? You want to think about what is going to influence the org at the top level and focus your time in those areas. Additionally, if you have limited bandwidth, you want to think of what the commonalities between your customers are. How can you allocate your resources efficiently to delight the most people? If you're trying to build a software and you have 5 engineers, maybe you allocate them towards one set of features. Maybe you don't build the auxiliary features until later down the road. You have to understand what people want the most and be able to deliver that to keep people the happiest and get returning customers. The last piece of advice this VP gave me was simple, and it's that which angers you controls you, so you must be able to set your emotions aside to be able to prioritize between your work. I've learned and grown an insane amount over my 4 years at Amazon, but the most important thing I've taken away is the wealth of connections and resources that I've been able to leverage over time. I cannot tell you how many trainings I've done that are available through Amazon have changed my life and the way I'm able to work and what I'm able to do. Just a few years ago, I didn't have any of the technical skills I had today, and that's what's made me successful so far. Continuing to learn and network with other people has really changed my journey, and it's something that I hope anybody can experience. Oftentimes, when you're not in an organization like this, it's hard to land connections with people to give you career advice. But I've reached out to dozens of people over the years, and they've been all willing to give me a little bit of their time to talk through where they are on their journey. This has really helped me pave my own career path, whether that's interviewing for different roles, or landing new promotions, or even changing teams. In my next video, I'm going to be taking you through the exact steps on how to land a tech job in 2024, and I can't get to it all today, but if you stay subscribed, I will give you that in the next video. It's important to mention that nothing that was discussed here is a trade secret. It's really just my experience and the advice I've gotten from other people over the course of my last 4 years. But I can assure you, if you apply a little bit of this advice, and you will find success and you'll be able to excel in your career.